Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Hello. A little bit of business. If you are out and about in the Nashville area, I'm performing on October 19th at 8 o'clock, I believe. Yep, 8 o'clock p.m. at Alley Taps in Printer's Alley. I will be doing a songwriter round with my friends Sam Brooker and Megan Linville. So that'll be big time, a lot of fun. And please, if you would, go download from iTunes, subscribe, review. Please let me know what you think. And when you subscribe, and when you review it as well, it goes up in the the metrics. I guess metrics. What do I know of metrics? I'm an American, for goodness sakes. We didn't do the metric thing. Are we the only ones? Oh, America. So lonely. Anyway, go to the website, heyhumanpodcast.com. I put up tons of links and talk about interesting humans and all that good stuff. It's all out there. It's all good. I think it's interesting. Hopefully you do too. This episode of Hey Human, I'm very excited to have for you guys to listen to. It is with William Puckett, who is a retired meteorologist and a current UFO researcher. Super duper cool. We had a great conversation. He told stories about different UFO sightings, his own research. It's just cool, man. I dig it. I love me some aliens. So, aliens, that's what matters. UFO researcher William Puckett on Hey Human Podcast. Enjoy. Hello.
Hey, hi.
How are you?
Well, not too bad. How about you?
I'm doing well, thank you. You're in Montana, right?
I am.
How's Montana?
In Helena, Montana?
In Helena? That's where you are?
Yeah. Yeah, the capital city of Montana.
Good fishing.
Yeah, I used to fish a lot, but I kind of got out of that. So.
You did? Yeah.
I'm too busy chasing UFOs.
Well, I'm so excited. Thank you for being on the podcast. I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah. Now, are you from the Seattle area originally, or what?
Yeah, I'm from Seattle originally. That's correct. I've lived in Nashville 10 years.
Oh, what do you do there?
I'm a professional songwriter, and I'm a painter, and I do a couple podcasts.
Wow, well, that's a pretty good bio. Yeah.
Yeah, I do a little bit of a lot.
Yeah. My brother travels to Nashville on business from time to time. He works for a company called Maximus. So.
Okay. What do they do?
They develop software for the federal Medicaid system.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, he makes a lot of money. I never made much money. But
Well, it's not everything, so.
No, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's get started. I read about you online, and it actually, I tell the backstory here for the listeners that I was in Seattle visiting my family, and I had taken some photographs in the sky, and when I went back to look at the pictures, there was a strange light, an orb that was in the pictures that seemed to be in a pattern different from what a normal pattern of something in the sky would be. And I thought, I'm going to send this to someone who might know what this is. And I found you online. That's how I discovered you. And I had posted the pictures on my Facebook page, and people pretty much immediately said, that's just a weird quirk of the light that iPhones make, which was highly disappointing. I was hoping to meet some aliens and go back to wherever I was actually from, but oh well. So tell me about you. You are a meteorologist, was your career path, correct?
Yes, I'm a retired meteorologist, probably in title only, because I still do weather. I'm a volunteer weather observer. I also have a first-class weather station and a webcam that looks at weather and also looks for UFOs. I actually got 4 of them, but one of them pulls up to the Weather Underground site, and I collect rainfall data, solar radiation, ultraviolet radiation, temperature, pressure, wind speed, and wind direction.
And do you report that back to the news agency, or
it goes up into Weather Underground's website?
Oh, okay.
And if people have the app on their iPhone, if they're close to my area, then my site will pop up on their iPhone or their cell phone.
And it's called Weather Underground?
Yeah, Weather Underground. Oh. They're non-profit. They're owned by IBM, but they do, they collect weather data all over the world, and I use it a lot for my UFO research.
Oh, how so?
Well, for example, I'm working on a case right now of a sighting in the Portland, Oregon area, Sherwood, Canby, which is south of Portland, of a video and photos taken of a kind of a white UFO that sat there for 3 or 4 hours, and I'm looking at the winds aloft data to see how the object drifted. I'm also looking at Doppler radar data, weather radar data, which is kind of hard to explain to your listeners, but the weather radar runs in what we call clear air mode and precipitation mode. When it's in clear air mode, the operator turns the gain up so it detects more information in the atmosphere, and it'll pick up particulates, birds, insects. Anyhow, I was able to determine from the Doppler radar that everything was flowing to the southeast, which is the way the object was going. So, in answer to your question, I'm looking at weather data to make a deduction of whether or not this particular object was moving with the wind. If I can prove it wasn't, then I can deduce that it probably wasn't a balloon or another flotation device. If it was, it means it may have been a balloon or flotation device. So that's an example. Another example would be to look at cloud heights. Say, for example, your light you saw in Seattle. Let's just use that as an example. Well, perhaps it was a cloudy night. Well, if the cloud bases were 5,000 feet, then I know this thing was at least no higher than 5,000 feet. So you can do some angular determinations, and then you can make some deductions how big the object was. So you just sort of get into this data loop, but weather is a very important component of that.
It's interesting. What brought you from? What was the logical step of going from meteorologist person who clearly was always looking up to becoming interested in unidentified flying objects?
Well, I've been a meteorologist ever since I got my master's degree in 1973. And I first became interested in UFOs when I took a job at the National Weather Service in Alaska, Juneau, Alaska, as a weather forecaster. And at that time, Air Force just released their Project Blue Book report. Project Blue Book went from 1947 to 1969. Was the only official, I use that word emphatically, government investigation of UFOs. Terminated in 1969. So then you're looking at a few years later, some books are written. So I read Project Blue Book. Well, there was 11,000 sightings. Nearly 800 were unidentified. Well, I said, that's quite a few. So I got interested then, and then the Roswell incident sort of made its way into the news around 1980. I read a book on that. Of course, since then there's been dozens of books written. And then, in the 1980s, a lot of documentaries are coming out on UFOs. I said, well, I wonder if I can research that. So in the late 1990s, I started doing my own research. I bought my website up, which is UFOs Northwest. I urge your listeners to go to that site, www.ufosnw.com. If they see something like you did, report it to me. I'll research it. So that's kind of a bird's eye view of my interest. I did get some interesting cases early on. One was a copy of the alleged Majestic 12 documents, which is the committee allegedly approved by Harry Truman, appointed by Harry Truman to investigate UFOs. And I had some documents I thought may have been the originals. unfortunately, the researcher I was working with lost them, which was very frustrating. And then I had some photos from a co-worker of her uncle who had been deceased for some 25 years that we thought may have been alien beings. And I researched that in detail. It turns out they were hydrocephalic babies, unshunted hydrocephalic babies.
Oh, can you explain what that means?
Hydrocephalus is a disease where the fluid builds up in the spinal column, and if it's not drained, it'll cause the head to grow.
Oh, interesting.
And they have a function called shunting, where they actually tap the neck, the spinal column, and drain out the fluid. So it's generally not a problem. For some reason or another, that was not done or done in time with these beings, and they looked like aliens. They had no sex organs, or they were very atrophied. They were on gurneys. They were burned severely.
Where did you see this? This is in a book?
No, I had the actual slides taken by this. My coworker's uncle was he'd been deceased 25 years. He was the head of the anatomy department at Temple University for years.
Okay. And so he had access to these...
He had these photos in a slide box, and when they separated out his belongings, my coworker's father, who was his brother, kept these, and then when he died, then my coworker found these slides.
Now, were they humanoids? They were humans that happened to have this genetic malfunction, or...
I don't know if hydrocephalus is genetic or not. I'm not a doctor. I think to a degree it is hereditary.
Well, it's interesting you said that the genitalia was not developed either, so I mean, that's...
Well, that was pretty strange. The genitalia were very atrophied or non-existent. And that's never really explained. The hands were malformed. You can go on and on, but I've had several doctors, plastic surgeons, even Dr. Cyril Weck, who's a very famous, he's on CNN a lot, he wrote a book on Joe Benet Ramsey, forensic pathologist, look at these. He's the first one that told me there were hydrocephalics. I also posed a question to Dr. Weck. I said, have you ever seen anything like that before? He said, no, he hadn't. And Dr. Weck has done a lot of autopsies. The strange thing about this case, I believe they were hydrocephalics, but the thing about it is in that same slide box, there was a slide of an atomic test on the Nevada test range. I went into the Atomic Energy Commission and on their website, and I found the actual date of the test and the name of the test. It was Project Dog, May of 1952. Now, in 1970, when these slides were taken, those tests were classified. They were not declassified until many, many years after that. So what I've determined through talking to other UFO researchers like Nick Redfern and some other guys, the military in the 1950s would put out corpses in these close to these nuclear bombs and see what effects nuclear radiation would have. It could have been that. How, and he got these slides, why he had them.
Sure. Well, there are corpse farms that are used now. I mean, that's how science figures out what happens to us when we die, how the elements affects bodies.
Yeah.
The FBI uses that data to determine how long bodies have been out and the elements and things like that. So I read a really interesting book about a corpse farm. I wouldn't want to work there. I bet it's quite smelly.
No, it's not very stimulating work. Not really conducive to a good night's sleep.
Well, it wasn't even that so much as the detail of the book was that it's the first time I've ever read a book that nearly made me vomit, that's impressive on the writer's side.
Right.
But, anyway.
Well, those are a couple of cases that I got my feet wet in the UFO field, and then in 2003 I bought up my site, and I used to get probably 3 or 4 reports a day.
Wow.
I do not anymore because there's just so many civilian groups, including MUFON, National UFO Reporting Center, and people collecting UFO reports, that it's fairly competitive to get reports. But I get enough reports that keep me busy, and certainly, once in a while I do come across something that's quite interesting and worthy of more in-depth analyses.
I read that one of the first sightings of a UFO dated back to the 1890s, at least as far as writing it down or talking about it. I don't know whether it was in the United States or in Europe, but I mean, that was definitely before things like Photoshop could fake it. So, have you yourself seen a UFO? You personally?
I have to truthfully say, I have never sighted one. I have found them on my security cameras. One time I was doing a UFO field investigation in Seattle, and I had a habit of shooting pictures from the site in each of the cardinal directions. When I went home and looked at the photo, I found a boomerang object in the background. This would have been over probably, I don't know, Bellevue, Issaquah, that particular area in the Seattle area. I don't know what that was. It could have been a flotation device. Here in Montana, I photographed one with my security cameras that I thought was kind of strange. I got radar data from the FAA that found a couple of blips, radar blips, right in the area when I saw the object. Is it a UFO? I don't know. Can't explain it. Could have been something else. But no, I have never seen one. But I'm kind of my own worst skeptic. I mean, I'm fairly incredulous when it comes to seeing something. I mean, I really am.
I would prefer my researchers to be skeptics, though, because that way you're not destroying the evidence with your own mind.
Right. However,
thinking.
I will say that I'm somewhat gullible too. I mean, I do look at information and I get pretty excited sometimes about photos and videos and radar data and even eyewitness reports. I mean, the sky's almost the limit in terms of weirdness, of reports that I've received. The very, very strange encounters that some people have.
Yes. Some of my friends as well. Alaska, I think Alaska's a good hotbed. And I mean, when I was walking my dog one night here in Nashville, he's since passed away, but this was probably 2 years ago, and it was about 11 o'clock at night, and I was walking him up on this hill. It was quite dark out, and I looked up, and there were 3 lights in the sky that were quite bright, and I thought, what are those planets? And then as I looked and as I watched them, they moved together all at once, together in a straight line up, and then down, and then they were just vanished. And I thought, well, shooting stars don't go in threes, I don't think, and they certainly don't have that significant of a pattern. I feel like so many people have had experiences where they see something and they think, nah, that can't be. But I believe that there must be alien life. My gosh, we cannot be the only one, our little tiny blip of an arm. There must be, and Lord knows they've got to be smarter than us.
Absolutely.
So I get excited when I hear people talk about it or see people, as I was joking at the beginning of this, and I'm just waiting for them to come back and say, oh, sorry we left you behind. Come on,
Well, actually, just your sighting that you just outlined, I mean, I can't explain that. I mean, it's obviously not a meteor because it moved in, some abrupt changes in direction.
Yes.
It's not satellites.
Yes.
There are triad satellites that the military flies, but they're not going to be changing direction. So, what did you see? I mean, it's hard to say.
And they
perhaps
vanished.
Perhaps it could have been reflections of light from the ground, although normally I would only expect to see that on a cloudy night, or because the light needs to have a background to refract the photons, and you need, of course, a cloud will refract photons, but normally the atmosphere doesn't do that unless there's fairly steep, what we call temperature inversion density, and then sometimes, but I mean, it leaves you scratching your head with cases like that.
So let's talk about Roswell for a second. Has that all been declassified? Is that now all out in the open?
Well, the truth about Roswell is nothing's been declassified because nothing's been admitted. From the government standpoint, Roswell never happened.
Really?
I mean, there has never been any information from the federal government at all related to Roswell. Nothing. Zero. Everything about Roswell has come from witnesses, from newspaper articles,
really,
from military people that were there. But as far as an official government document, there is nothing on Roswell.
I think that's very odd.
Congressman Stephen Schiff, who is since deceased, who was district congressman from that representing Roswell, was included in his district, requested when he was congressman a government accounting office to do an audit of all records with Roswell and all federal agencies that could have had records. They came back and said they had nothing, and that there were records that had been destroyed, perhaps related to Roswell. Now, I say that there was one document, and I'm trying to remember what it was, that was recovered from a government archive that was related to Roswell. But a lot of the skeptics claim it was planted there by a UFO researcher, that it never came out of the government archive. So from my standpoint, I have never seen anything released on Roswell. The only thing I'll say about government documents, when I worked for the History Channel on the UFO Hunter series, I did research for them. I was on a couple of episodes also, but most of my work was research on projects, one of which was Roswell. And I requested weather data for Roswell Army Airfield in July 1947. And I got it. So those are records. Those are government records, not related to the UFO. The interesting aspect of that is I believe it was on July 8th or 9th when allegedly the debris was flown from Roswell Army Airfield to Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth. On that date, the weather observer was gone. Gone. Now keep in mind, this is the rainy season. Severe thunderstorms pop up in southeastern New Mexico in July. This is the only military base in the world at the time had nuclear weapons. B-29 bombers, they had 12 nuclear weapons in Roswell at the time that the spacecraft allegedly was recovered. So why was the observer gone? Now, I took that information at the time because Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. lived in Helena. He handled the debris as an 11-year-old. I had a lunch with Dr. Marcel. He died here a couple of years ago. I gave him that data, and he was kind of impressed with it. He also added, Dr. Marcel, that the debris that was photographed at Carswell Air Force Base, the balloon envelope was sitting on the floor. The balloon envelope is an envelope that the balloon is stored in. Why would a balloon envelope be sitting on the floor? The reason it's sitting on the floor is because they got it out of storage. That's why.
Yeah.
So,
fascinating.
But it's a long-winded answer to your question, but
do you think there's a correlation?
There's nothing been released. So.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Do you think there's a correlation with the fact that there was nuclear devices being stored there and there was a sighting?
Yes. very well could be the case, because UFOs love nuclear bases.
What do you mean?
Well, they're some of the most compelling sightings have been on nuclear bases. I mean, Roswell, Area 51, Whiteman Air Force Base, Knob Nostrum, Missouri. I had 2 very good UFO cases. Ellsworth Air Force Base, Rapid City, South Dakota. Minot Air Force Base, Minot, North Dakota.
Do you think they need fuel? Is that why?
No, I think they're just looking at...
See how far we've come?
Sort of auditing our nuclear arsenal.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I mean, the cases at Whiteman, and I had 2 cases, one in 1983, another in 1998 in the middle of the night. And in one case, they call them igloos. They're weapon storage facilities. Out of the 20 igloos, 2 of them stored nuclear weapons. The UFOs were shooting down beams to these 2 igloos. They knew right where the nuclear weapons were. So,
wow, interesting.
Read between the lines. Of course, Bentwaters, England. That's another very, very major case of.
What happened there?
Weapons. Well, that's where Sergeant Peniston and Airman Burroughs, saw those lights outside the base, and then they got Colonel Halt to come with them, and that's when he had that audio tape, and they saw these UFOs, and Sergeant Peniston had walked up to it the night before and touched the darn thing. They had radiation readings, they had land traces, the whole 9 yards. And Sergeant Peniston and Burroughs are very ill right now because of exposure to this UFO. When I was in Chicago 2 years ago, I was filming for a Close Encounters series that's on the Discovery Channel. They've canceled that series, but those episodes, I'm sure, are available probably on DVD, and probably through YouTube, in other outlets. But anyhow, the producer or the director told me that he had talked to Burroughs and Peniston recently, and they were both very ill from this situation. I don't know whether they got cancer or what, but they're trying to get on disability.
What happened to the documentation that they took? Is it classified?
Well, that particular case, there is very little official government release of records. British Ministry of Defence released some documents, but the actual Bentwaters, even Colonel Halt couldn't get information on it, and he was privy to the sighting. So the interesting thing about Bentwaters, I'm friends with a guy that helped me out a lot, Dr. Joe Ryan, lives on the West Coast. And Dr. Ryan was chief scientist for the Air Force and NATO. And his first job, this was as a civilian, was at Bentwaters in the early 80s. Well, after this UFO incident, they shipped all the personnel out of there. And he didn't even know about the case till it aired in a TV documentary.
Really?
But he saw UFO reports come across his desk from fighter pilots, and they were all sent to Langley in Virginia, all the UFO reports. So those are a few. There are many more. Another one, Bangor Base up there in northwest Washington, Naval Air Station. Those are both facilities that house nuclear weapons.
I have to say that a lot of my friends who live up in the Northwest, they have the most sightings, the people I know up there.
I get more sightings from Washington and Oregon than any other state. I do.
I wonder why that is.
Good question. I mean, that was the case in the summer of 1947 when Kenneth Arnold, first June 24th, 1947, when he sighted those 9 discs over Mount Rainier. There was a lot of research done with newspaper articles, and in the summer of 1947, Washington State per capita by far and large had the most UFO sightings, followed closely by Oregon. And I did a study in the early 2003, same thing, more and more UFO sightings per capita in Washington State. I don't know why.
So you say you tend to err on the skeptic side doing your research, which I think is healthy. But do you believe that we have been visited by other beings from another place, whether it be dimensional and or planetary?
Yes, I believe we have been, are being, and it's an ongoing thing. There's a couple of several theories about that. I do not think that interstellar travelers are coming in and out of our atmosphere on a regular basis. I believe you hit on higher dimensional parallel universe. A lot of them could be that. There could be alien bases on Earth of alien beings that have been here a long time. There's also another theory that bipedal reptoids, which have been seen, I got a report recently of one, they're seen in remote areas.
Oh, I'd love to hear about that.
Maybe when the dinosaurs got killed, a lot of reptiles went underground and maybe they evolved to intelligent species. Another theory is that the Nazis may have developed flying saucer technology during the war and after the war. They got bases in Antarctica. That's another theory. So, and it could be all of the above. But I do believe that they are here. They have very advanced technology systems, but I can't prove that. I believe it, but I can't prove it.
If you could prove it, you probably wouldn't be alive.
Yeah, that's...
I mean, I know, I always joke with my friends that I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but everything's a conspiracy until it's proven true, and I don't know why it's so out of the realm of possibility to people. If I'm an exceptionally intelligent being, and I don't want to be seen, I'm not going to be seen. I don't find it to be so surprising, but I also don't think... Personally, I feel like there's probably more than one, for lack of a better word, race of being. And I know people are going to think I'm a lunatic, but I don't care. Let them. I also think that there's no way that at some point our government, somebody in our government, some military, somebody, for them to say absolutely emphatically no, and to say that it doesn't exist and all that, it seems pretty ridiculous to me. Especially given all the sightings. There's so many sightings. It's like saying dogs don't exist.
Right. Let me comment on a couple of things you said. You mentioned sightings in the 1800s, and you also mentioned government knowledge. Well, here in Montana, in a town near Bannock, that's an old western town, is actually where Henry Plummer was hanged in the 1800s, an outlaw. But anyhow... a gentleman he's a retired pilot, a treasure hunter, does a lot of gold and silver hunting, and there's a lot of mining in Montana, and he likes to go to old abandoned mines and treasure hunt. Well, anyhow, he came across this diary of a stagecoach manager, August 1870, said a spaceship crashed near Bannock. So we researched it. We went down there. It's in a very remote area. Takes an all-terrain vehicle to get in there. It's infested with rattlesnakes. It's high. It's like near 7,000. I didn't see any rattlesnakes, by the way, but I had a hard time getting my gear in there. But we took a lot of measurements and everything, and I didn't find anything compelling other than some magnetic anomalies. But the area looks to be artificial. It looks like it doesn't belong there. Well, the real bottom line in this story is that this pilot, a retired pilot, kept getting these calls from NASA wanting to know, hey, what's going on? We want to know what's in this area. He ignored them. Finally, one day, a few weeks later, this SUV pulls up by his house with the NASA logo on the side. 4 guys get out, men. And they said, you're going to take us up to this crash site. And he said, I'll drive. They said, no, you're riding with us. They spent all day up there. They had all kinds of gear. And finally they left, at the end of the day, and they said, nothing is there. This was a meteor crash. Well, there's no meteor rocks there. Meteor rocks are black. And my take on the whole thing is, number one, they weren't NASA, they were CIA. And number two, we had the phone number that they called, and we called that phone number, and it was out of order. And that's a Langley, Virginia phone number. That's where the CIA is located. And they threatened him. And I'd say, well, he's blowing smoke. Well, when the agents were there, whoever they were, one of his friends, out-of-town friends, called. And Warren, the name of my contact, passed the phone to one of the agents. And they told this guy, you stay out of there. And this guy told him to F off. And so why they were interested, because they did not want civilian people potentially finding an alien spacecraft, potential alien artifacts. They found out about it through the media because this got some coverage in the local media.
Sure.
And they didn't find anything. But what that told me is, yes, they do have a vested interest in UFOs, and this was a case where they might have slipped through their fingers. So they took an interest in it until they didn't find anything. So, old case, and number two, a case of government interest.
Yeah. What is the most compelling UFO sighting that you have researched yourself, that you can speak to?
That's a difficult question because there's been so many. One that stands out to me is a case in Dana Point, California. I believe it was March 2007. A guy was walking in the morning, a sunny morning, and he sees this dish-shaped craft flying about jet speed. It stops and hovers. He shoots a photo of it. It zips away and goes into the water near Catalina Island. I've analyzed that photo. I've had people do forensic animation of it, forensic study in the local area. That is a very compelling case. A lot of UFOs have been seen in that area going into the water, coming out of the water in Catalina Island. That's a very interesting case. Another point, fast forward 9 years, January 2016, Nephi, Utah. The head of the Mutual UFO Network in Utah contacted me because I have some expertise and background and analysis of weather and aviation radar. Well, a local person, a ham radio operator, who actually has his own UFO show, had his scanner on one night, and he hears this airline pilot talking to FAA about a UFO sighting, asking him if they had it on radar. He's flying at 31,000 feet near Nephi, Utah. He sees this huge light on the ground. He asks the FAA, do you have it on radar? Response, no, we do not. And so we, myself, Erica Lukes, who's the MUFON director, and Pat Daniels, who was the ham radio operator that got the data, we kind of looked into this. We found some air traffic control voice tapes online, got a portion of the actual broadcast. We didn't even know the airline. We finally determined it was American Airlines flight that had taken off from San Francisco, was flying en route to Philadelphia. This happened about midnight. So we obtained more of the voice tapes, some of which had been redacted. I have almost direct proof of that. But I found, in an isolated area, all kinds of radar returns right where this pilot saw this object. And those radar returns, they were there for a good half hour, and every rotation of the radar would be 1 to 3 returns. They're right in the valley by Nephi, Utah, right where this object was sighted. So that's one of the more forensic, compelling sightings I've ever got. Another case, and I can't remember, this was in the Carolinas. I'd have to look on my site. Actually, your viewers, if they want to, I'll kind of get sidetracked here in a minute. If they want to find my best sightings, go to my site, my website. I'm actually going to look here.
Yeah, I'll put links to all that stuff on my HeyHumanPodcast.com
and then go to on my top menu there, and you can see top cases, and click on that, and the cases that I filtered that are the most compelling will show up. I'll specifically mention another case, and this was in one of the Carolinas. I can't remember either North Carolina or South Carolina. I'd have to actually look in detail to find it. But this particular case, this woman had taken a friend home, and she was driving back. It was only about a 10 or 15 mile trip, and I believe it was probably around midnight, maybe a little bit later. All of a sudden, her car stops, and it starts shaking, just like someone is shaking her car. And she sees this weird light outside her window. Next thing she remembers, she comes to, her car starts, it's on this road, and 3 hours are gone. She drives home, and she's just petrified. And her friend, she didn't even go home, she drives to her friend's house. And her friend says, "Where were you? I was calling you on his cell phone." Her cell phone was right on the seat. 3 calls went to voicemail during this time period. They call the police, and the police kind of laughed it off as a meteor sighting. And so, case in point, what was it? I mean, she was petrified. I interviewed her. My actual voice tape of her interview is on my site. And so that particular case stands out.
What do you think is the deal with the lost time that people experience?
I really think there's 2 reasons for that. It could have been a potential abduction, or I think actually there's a time and space warp around these UFOs.
I think that too. I feel like in order for them to for some of them at least, and this is my own theory in my own brain, I am obviously not a physicist, but that you would have to bend time in order to do what they do, in order to travel where they're traveling to and from. One would imagine they've mastered the art of bending time and tearing through some space. I mean, Einstein theorized it, right? That it is a possibility. He just didn't know how to do it.
Right. I had another case also of a different type of time dilation, but this was actually not too far from Roswell, near the Vaughan, New Mexico area, which is, I don't know whether you've ever been to New Mexico, but if you drive from Albuquerque, a couple times I went down there. I flew to Albuquerque and rented a car, drove to Roswell. You drive through a town called Vaughan. Well, this guy was a truck driver, and he was trucking used cars. There was a bunch of used cars bought by used car lots of a rental car auction, Hertz rental car auction in Denver. And a lot of truck drivers drive in the middle of the night for traffic, and also it's a lot cooler. You know, it gets brutally hot in the Southwest. And I believe he had dropped 3 cars off somewhere, and he was on his way to El Paso, Texas. And he pulled off the side of the road to check his load. And all of a sudden, he kind of feels his hair stand on end, like there's electricity in the air. He had a long flashlight. His flashlight went off. His truck turned off, idling. He looks up, and there's this huge triangular-shaped object coming from the south, right over the top of him, blotting out the stars. And he didn't know what to do. His truck's stalled, flashlight's dead. So he said what he usually does is he gets in the back of the car, his truck, and backs off one of the cars and gets help. He goes back there, his car wouldn't start. All of a sudden, the UFO starts retreating, flying in reverse. His truck starts, his flashlight comes on. He gets the heck out of there. Next morning in El Paso, they're unloading some cars, and he makes a discovery. The clock in his truck had lost time. The clock in the car's lost. How does he know that? He had a wind-up clock in his sleeper. He looked at that clock. 13 minutes were lost. All the clocks, including the clocks in his cars that he backed out, lost 13 minutes.
Interesting.
So another case in point.
Yeah.
Time dilation.
You know, and it's funny they say, the argument, of course, is that, well, if there was alien life and they were visiting us, of course we would be told. But can you imagine the pandemonium? Religion would be set on its ear. If we're supposed to be the only people made in God's image, you know, and suddenly there are other beings out there, that would mess up some pretty intense doctrines, right?
And you mentioned that point, and that very same concept was deduced by the Rand Corporation in a NASA-funded study in 1960, and they wanted a group of experts, sociologists, economists, religious, ministers, clergy people to comment on this, and even scientists, and they said that if extraterrestrial life was here and that the public knew it, it would cause pandemonium in the financial markets, in religious circles.
Yeah, people wouldn't be able to handle it, I feel
right.
like.
And I do believe that today that might change somewhat.
Sure. It's getting... I have a joke with my friends also that the media tries to lessen the blow of things. You know, they have movies about ghosts and demons and then aliens and contact, and, you know, they're slowly getting people's awareness and openness through the media because people are quite easily manipulated by media, of course.
Right.
So it would
also,
make sense.
I'll bring up the fact that particular case that I just mentioned was in Gray Court, South Carolina. I brought it up on my website.
Gray Court.
So
yeah. Oh, okay.
Gray Court, South Carolina. So
are there
if any of your viewers or listeners are interested in that case, I have an actual tape of the witness.
The girl
interview.
Yeah.
On that stuff.
Great. I'll definitely put a link to that. I'll link to all that stuff.
Yeah, it happened on May 7th, 2015.
So I remember reading something somewhere in the back of my brain pan. I remember that there was an astronaut. Some astronaut saw something and had reported it, and that actually had video, and then the video got staticked out by NASA. Do you know about this?
Well, there's been several instances of astronauts, you know, talking about UFO sightings, and of course, all the videos and photos and everything all that information gathered from the space station or the shuttle or even missions to the moon, you know, that they don't. I mean, they're not going to have a camera with them and just come home and show their camera to their family. I mean, that goes through NASA. And actually, you know, a lot of that NASA information, and this gentleman, and it depends on who you talk to, NASA doesn't consider him a gentleman, Gary McClendon, this English guy, he actually hacked in the Defense Department and NASA websites, and they wanted to lock him up and throw away the key. I think his mother finally got him shielded from that. They wouldn't extradite him because she said that he had mental problems. Well, why did they want to come after him? Well, he did hack into government systems, and he found UFO information. I mean, even to the point that NASA was cooperating with non-terrestrial species on this, and he found that in his, when he hacked into the NASA website and also in the Defense Department website. So,
yeah,
you say, well, yeah, do they know about it? Well, you get a few things like that, and you got to believe that they probably do.
Well, there's a lot of information that they don't release to the public. I have a friend who, a NASA affiliate, a physicist, and he. Do you remember when they released information about the super Earths? And they said, "Oh, we've discovered that there's, these two. I can't remember if they said 2 or 5 super Earths, 100,000 light years away, yada yada, likely to have inhabitants very much like our own, and if not, that we would be able to live there. The atmosphere is correct and all that." Well, he had called me before that article came out, before the news media received the information. He said, "You're never going to guess." He said, "What we figured, we've seen and we figured out, but they're not going to tell the public about it. They're only going to tell them about a couple of them, but we found at least 20. But they can't say that out loud because, I was like, you shouldn't be talking on an unsecured phone line, buddy." But I will keep that to heart. And no, I'm blabbing it, but I don't care.
Well, you mentioned NASA and what will be the official disclosure when it happens. In my opinion, it'll likely be astronomers that discover extraterrestrial life, and it can't be denied.
That's under the assumption, though. Don't you think that that's under the assumption that it's an interplanetary thing and not an interdimensional thing? And then when it's NASA,
will be I mean, they're not going to see anything interdimensional. But I don't have any doubt that there's intelligent life. In our galaxy. I believe it. We might even find life in our solar system. Maybe not intelligent life, but NASA actually is looking at this star system 1,500 light years away, and they believe they found something like a Dyson sphere, because there's what they think is artificial infrared light emitting from the star system, and it's too close to the star to be a planet, and they think it's an artificial, what they call a Dyson sphere. And Dyson sphere is an artificial environment. They can't prove it, but it'll be that type of thing where they can verify incontrovertibly that there's a non-terrestrial intelligent life forms outside our solar system.
Well, as soon as we find intelligent life forms on this planet, we can handle elsewhere.
I know. You wonder how intelligent we are,
Exactly.
We're a hostile species. We kill each other.
We are a very hostile. So, if I was an extraterrestrial and I came to this planet, I think I'd take a step back or two, because I wouldn't want to end up on a gurney somewhere. And we are a very violent species. Very young, very violent, very primal.
Well, you mentioned that a violent species, and you mentioned top cases. Well, I had another case. This was in Missouri, right along the Mississippi River between Missouri and Illinois. And this guy calls me one night, and he's in a remote area, and he said, there are these green lights. They're over the Mississippi River, and some of his friends in Illinois were seeing them. They called the sheriff and undersheriff across the river, and they were looking at these things. These lights were hovering over the Mississippi River. Finally, the sheriff says, "We don't know what these things are. We can't explain them. We're leaving." So these guys get out their shotguns and their rifles. They start shooting at this thing, and they got on boats. And all of a sudden, their boats shut down. This thing gets big, their boats shut down, and then it vanishes. And he calls me back, and he's pushing his boat onto an island. I could hear the water sloshing as he's talking to me on his cell phone. So they shot at him. It let them know, you ain't going to hurt us. we'll fix you. We shut their boats down. It wasn't just one boat, there were 4 or 5. So, case in point, would you want to interact with somebody?
Yeah, it's like antagonizing a lion in the zoo or something, where, it's a smart enough creature, but...
Right.
At the end of the day. I read Whitley Strieber's book, Communion.
I read that, too.
Yeah, it scared the bejeebies out of me. I thought, my gosh, if there are... I mean, that's a whole nother ball of wax. That's starting to get now, of course, into actual alien abduction and contact and all that. And and that's sort of past the realm of UFO. But it is a fascinating read and a fascinating subject, for sure. Do you feel like you've had any kind of experience outside of...
I never have. I talk to people. Matter of fact, one of my good UFO friends on the West Coast is an experiencer, is sort of tuned into this higher dimensional whatever. I'm not. I've had a couple of paranormal experiences unrelated to UFOs.
Yes.
But not directly related to UFOs.
Yeah.
One of my friends who had deceased showed up on my bedside about a week later, and I'd say, well, maybe I was hallucinating, but 6 other people saw her also. So you feel like, well, maybe she
came for a visit.
She just said goodbye, and
yeah.
She was in a black dress, and I'd seen her. She had deceased a week or 2 before that.
Yeah, I believe in that stuff too. I believe in lots of stuff.
Yeah, but I've never had any UFO encounters, or missing time, or...
I've never had the missing time, but I've definitely seen things that I could not explain, which is technically what an unidentified flying object is, of course, it's unidentifiable, hard to and undetermined. One of my best friends, his father, who's from Alaska, but I think this might have happened in Washington State. I can't remember. I think it was Washington. They were camping, his father and his father's friend, and they were driving, and the car stopped, and they lost time. And he won't really talk about it. He gets very upset if you even bring up the subject. So I don't know if he has some slight recollections or what, but people, I know that psychiatrists, I've read articles about, people say, oh, it's mass hysteria and, the mind is so easily influenced. I do believe that is true, for sure. The mind is very easily influenced. However, I think if you take somebody who is here and then you take somebody who is way over there and somebody who's way over there in that country and way over there in that country, and they're all having the same experience without any way of connecting the dots, then you start to question that it seems like something is happening.
Absolutely. These cases of abduction, of course, are very, very difficult to investigate because you don't have any environmental data. MUFON was allegedly going to do a study where they had planted cameras and radiation detectors and magnetometers and all this, but I never did see any results of that study. You mentioned Alaska, and also what I'd like to say to your listeners is that the best UFO sightings are in very remote areas. Perhaps that was in Washington State, I don't know, but the best cases that I've ever looked at will happen right in the middle of nowhere. Forest Service worker southwest of Olympia, Washington, had just had coronary bypass surgery. One morning he's out taking a little stroll on a logging road, and this flying disc is hovering about 100 feet ahead of him. It pulls straight up in the air, something drops out of it, bangles down trees and everything. I investigated this case several years after. I actually looked at the actual area where the sighting was and interviewed him, and that was a case. Another case, this happened north of Dallas-Fort Worth on a farm, and this gentleman I think his daughter was 8 or 9 years old. They're driving a tractor on his father-in-law's farm, and the little girl was steering the tractor, and she all of a sudden screams and look up. Big dish-shaped craft comes out of this gully straight up, and so you get cases like that.
Yeah.
Very remote areas.
Yeah, I am curious about the concept of the good and the bad, and the you know, as far as who we're dealing with.
Right.
And the other joke I make, of course, is that the only way to unify the planet that is to have a full-on, you know, that movie Independence Day, where aliens would actually have to attack. It's the only way we'll all get along. And then about an hour later, we'll forget and hate each other again. But, you know, for that one little tiny frame, we can rise up against the evil aliens. I don't know.
Well, you know, there's a lot of speculation about that. If there was an actual full-fledged alien invasion, what could we do? You know, I mean, they could blast us out of the sky.
Absolutely.
But why would they want to do it? I mean, what
resources? But the way we're just
gained, you know, other than us perhaps being a interstellar threat eventually, you know. But right now we're sort of contained here. I mean, with all our nuclear toys and everything.
Yeah.
And what kind of a threat are we?
Yeah, we might wipe ourselves out, but I don't know that unless. I mean, if I were an alien being and Earth was under my watch, I would just make sure that they didn't have the capacity to leave the planet very far, because we can't be trusted. We're too young.
Right.
You know.
Well,
we'd be way too dangerous.
I'm reasonably sure they, even if they aren't here, I do believe they are, that they know all about us by now. I mean,
and they're shaking their heads.
Right. You know, another argument about intelligent life is how long does life last before, you know, either environmental pollution or war or other things extinguish it. I mean, right now, we're getting at the end of the hour, but, you know, I'm a meteorologist, and, of course, climate change is one of the biggest threats to this civilization, and we're in a real danger right now of extinguishing life of climate change.
I agree.
And that's only an example, but, you know, when we find extraterrestrial life, I mean, it's not a question of if, it's when. And this is officially, they're going to find that they're going to be looking for artificial heat source, infrared. That's, and any intelligent life out there will find us that way too. So
yeah.
Anyhow,
let's hope it's sooner rather than later. I'd love to. That's every time I go on a first date, that's my first question. If aliens landed and said, "We're gonna take you on this trip, you don't get to come back. When you do come back, everyone would be dead. So you might as well just let go of that idea. Would you go?" And for me, I would say, "Sign me up. I'm gone." How fascinating! What a wonderful experience that would be. Could they guarantee my safety? Who knows? Doesn't matter. What an experience. So I always ask that question on the first date. Would you go? Would you not go? I think it says a lot about a person.
Well, I would concur with that. I think I would sign up to take the tour too.
Yeah, of course. You know, how could you not? I was raised on Star Trek. I would have to go.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, William, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm going to put links to all the stuff that we talked about on my website, so they can find you and find the information. And
okay. Please send me, direct me to your website and everything, and I'll take a look.
I will, absolutely.
And I urge your listeners to visit my site, and if they see something compelling, if they have a photo or video, please send it to me.
Absolutely. And I will do the same if I see something again. It's always that thing where you're out and you think, oh my God, where's my camera? Where's something? And anymore, I feel like the alien life, they're going to have issues with people pulling out their cell phones. Now it's so easy to get footage of things.
Yeah, you can take a high definition video with an iPhone, so.
Yeah, except for if your engines are getting shut off, maybe they'll jam.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
That's eliminate. You know, not regarding technical difficulties.
Yes. Well, the truth is out there. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I look forward to visiting with you in the future.
Yeah, have a wonderful night.
Yeah, you too.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.